I'm Jeffrey DeRose, Business Development Manager at the CSI Tech Incubator. And the CSI Tech Incubator program is really about helping local entrepreneurs build and grow their businesses. And we just want to create that space where people can kind of plug in and help their startups grow. And we have Esmeralda Herrera today. She's a director at Communitas Americas, running a tech incubator program up in the Bronx. And Esmeralda, I'll let you introduce yourself and your program.
Yeah, well, thank you everybody for coming and joining us and having, this chat, which I hope is just really organic, and we can talk about the ways that both myself, but the organization that I'm here representing, Communitas America, doing a lot of good work to support social entrepreneurs, and particularly entrepreneurs of color and women entrepreneurs. So I'm director of programs and community relations with Communitas America. I've been with them for a little over a year and a half. Prior to that, I was working in India with an organization called Project Potential, which is very kind of similar to Communitas America because they were trying to support entrepreneurs and change makers in rural India. And then before that, I was working in China for a social enterprise. And so I think for myself, I've gotten the opportunity to support just different groups of people and see what vulnerability may look like in different contexts, and just feel really passionate about entrepreneurship. And now coming back home to the Bronx, born and raised, I've been able to take my learnings that I, learned in China and in India, and come home and say, okay, you know what, this is some of the things that I've learned and I want to put it out there. So, and then I'll just talk a little bit about Communitas America. So Communitas America is a nonprofit, and the mission is really to support social impact ecosystem in underserved communities. And one of the ways that we do that is through our accelerator program called Communitas Ventures. And we've had the opportunity to go through 4 cohorts, and we want the cohorts to be super representative of the Bronx and Harlem, right? The local area where we serve. And so a lot of our ventures and our entrepreneurs are people of color. They're women. They're people who are solving a social issue through a business idea. And a lot of the times that they dabble with using tech-based in order to incorporate into their business. And there'll be lots of cool, I will share hopefully throughout this talk some really cool ideas that we've encountered so far.
Yeah. It sounds like you guys are doing amazing things. And just once again, thank you for being on this show today and, sharing with us your experiences and how, you're doing amazing work in the community. And I really actually just want to start with asking, how did you get started in this space of, working with incubators and accelerators? I know you work with India, and now you're working with, you worked in India and now you're working with Communitas Americas. How did you get started?
Yeah, I think for me, I started going down the rabbit hole of, nonprofits. And yes, I still work with one now. But I was, doing a lot of like social work and working with students who are phasing out of the foster care system. And I just felt so trapped. I felt so cornered because everything was like, just like, okay, this is the grant you got and that's it. And you had to meet certain criteria. You had to, meet a certain kind of threshold. And it was really difficult. And I think I didn't really understand entrepreneurship because it's not, unfortunately, something taught in schools, right? Just period, point blank. But I think also in the Bronx and, underserved communities, you'll hear even less of it. And I think you'll hear even less social entrepreneurship, right? And so I think having, I studied linguistics in college, and so I learned Mandarin, and that's how I was out living in China for a couple of years, and working with that social enterprise helped me see, like, you know what, this route is really a possibility, and entrepreneurship is a possibility for folks. And so, but how will that look like? Especially because sometimes entrepreneurship is not as easy as one may think, right? Like, oh, all you got to do is go in it and bootstrap. Bootstrap with what, right? How do you get started? And yes, it starts with just an idea, but it also means bringing together an ecosystem of people who can contribute and empower your idea. And so here I am, and I kind of just found Communitas America when they were first just really starting out. They've just gone through the first cohort, and I was able to bring in information about like, you know what, this is what I've seen in the Bronx and this is what I've seen abroad, and put more information into the accelerator.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And I guess now it kind of makes sense, like how you've gotten from where you are to where you are, from where you were to where you are today. And that's interesting. And I really like how your program is kind of focused on not just, tech and entrepreneurship, but specifically social entrepreneurship. And you're focusing on founders that's making change in the community, and what is it like running an incubator with that kind of focus? A lot of times, people are just so focused on technology, and if it's really not this tech-based business, then they can't get access to resources. Where you guys are kind of taking the approach, a different approach, where you're saying like, hey, we really want to give social businesses, I mean, whether it's kind of tech enabled or not, and an opportunity to thrive.
Yeah, well, I think first I want to kind of debunk, because I think a lot of times people think, oh, you're a social entrepreneur, you have a nonprofit. And actually, that is not the case at all. A lot of our founders are actually for profit or B Corps, right? And very, very small number of them are nonprofit, or at least they kind of phase out of that as well once they learn a little bit more information. But it can be difficult. And the reason why is because people want to see, oh, can you give me a profit, right? And so they automatically think social impact won't give a profit. And I think now, with a new generation coming up, we kind of see that differently playing out. We see like, no, actually, those two are very much aligned. You can have both of them as the bottom line. It just means how do you do it? And I think even some of the ventures I've gone through our accelerator program is looking at like how they're trying to think differently. So they have an issue. What is that issue? Health in the Bronx. We're county number 62 out of the entire New York State for the past 10 years. That means that we're the unhealthiest county ever in the whole New York City. And it's not something we're proud of. And so people are trying to think of, okay, if I care more about the social issue, how can I make a business that's flourishing but is still solving this issue? And I think it has been difficult because that changes, right? Like tech is more in style, right? How you measure social impact is also volatile, right? Like you can't just say this is the one and be all. And so I think even for us, gathering the resources and gathering different speakers to speak on that topic, and for us to like broaden out that research is difficult. But I think all of the ventures that have gone through our program, which I hope to share, they've shown us that it is possible.
Yeah. That's amazing. And, just to add on to all that you're saying, myself, I'm pseudo a social entrepreneur as well. And I think we're all like fighting for social causes. And I think it's never been a better time to be a social entrepreneur. It's never been a better time to profit off of improving your community. So I also just feel like, this is a real cultural trend that you can profit off of helping people, and there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe just to segue a little bit, you're working in the Bronx with these social entrepreneurs. What are some of the common issues and challenges you're seeing with entrepreneurs in the Bronx?
Yeah, I guess two things there. The challenges that they're trying to solve, like what are the common challenges that they're trying to solve in the Bronx? And then what are some common challenges that they face?
Yes.
I think I'll start with the Bronx one, like what challenges are there? Because like one, I would say, yes, they're all different types of communities, and a lot of communities are vulnerable, right? And it's not just about like how you define yourself or where you're located or how much money you have. Like there's different ways that it'll make you vulnerable, right? And even the simple fact of being an entrepreneur can sometimes be vulnerable. And I talked about that earlier, being able to expose your idea, right? To so many people that are going to just critique it, because that is just the fact of the matter of entrepreneurship. But some of the issues that the Bronx, that a lot of our entrepreneurs tend to solve is health, right? And I talked about, that if, entrepreneur made a joke that if the Bronx did the 10-year challenge, do you remember the 10-year challenge on Instagram? It would be the same. Like we would look the same, because our health, we have one of the higher rates of asthma. And that's due to city planning in a way, right? What are the trucks that are coming through? Because of that, we also had the highest number of COVID deaths per capita. One of them, at one point, one of the highest death per capita in the entire country. And that, kind of involved all of the other factors. And I think the two other issues that entrepreneurships tend to tackle is education. We also have the highest dropout rate in New York City, and a lot of students don't get to complete high school, let alone go on to college. And then financial empowerment. So out of the 5 boroughs, right, we're in New York City is super diverse, but out of the 5 boroughs, the Bronx is coming on an average salary of $37,000 a year. And then the 4th borough after that is coming in around 45,000. So it's like a huge difference, and so they're trying to tackle like financial empowerment and wellness, as well as health and education.
Oh, wow. That's interesting, that there's all these different areas that the Bronx is really struggling with. And, the entrepreneurs are really coming up with ideas to tackle them. And can you maybe just speak to what are some of the challenges that they're facing, in tackling these issues?
And, I guess we all know about the different issues in terms of like venture capital is not very accessible to women, right? Let alone women of color. But I think some of the more common issues that we've seen or we've been trying to support our entrepreneurs is, for example, contract building with your partners. Some of our entrepreneurs are literally women of color, and they get underestimated. And they don't know, sometimes they get pushed to the brink of like how they should have their contracts with their partners or with people that they're exchanging. And a lot of times they wanted to bring it down, right? So that's something we're even tackling in our Women's Founders Cohort coming up, as well as marketing. Even though we're in the day and era of, social media, because we're in the day and era of social media, there's so much storytelling happening. And so how can you tell a story that's specific for your customers? And, we noticed that because we talked to our entrepreneurs, and because of that, we're doing a pilot program, like how specifically for marketing for our social entrepreneurs. I think that the other issue that I'll talk about, and it's an issue with social entrepreneurship, is that sometimes you're tackling 2 things, right? You're like gaining momentum and downloads and customers, right? So making that profit. But at the same time, you're doing education. And so how do you let someone know that they need to buy your product when a lot of it is overcoming educational barriers? For example, let's see, one of our previous winners, her venture is called Equity Design. And she is tackling health disparity in the Bronx by utilizing data. But most importantly, she was creating curricula where she was able to analyze both the location and the end goal of the client and provide them with a specific type of curricula that they would then train the staff with, right? It's already programs that are out there, but the other types of programs don't do so well because they never take into consideration the location, right? They never take into consideration the type of physical mobility that the other customers have. And so, she due to her background in health, she's been able to create a type of organization that's tackling a bit better the social impact, but also the needs of the customer, of the other business.
That's definitely really interesting, and that's that's what you're saying about, like, you need to not just try to sell your product, but you also need to educate your customers and educate people at scale to like kind of get them into your community or get them into your ecosystem and things like that. So that's really interesting. And maybe just want to take a little high level. The episode we're talking about today is entrepreneurship in vulnerable places. And so from what you're seeing, what does what does entrepreneurship look like in minority communities that's maybe different than from your typical situation?
Yeah, so I think for us, for Communitas America, we've worked so much with ventures that, may or may not be venture capital applicable. But sometimes they may not have the resources, like, okay, building out further that wireframing, building out, let's say, their business plan, right? Because a lot of the times the resources for entrepreneurship that you'll find in the Bronx is very brick and mortar. How do you create your daycare? How do you create your laundromat? How do you create your deli, which are very vital and important as entrepreneurs in the community, and we very much need them, but then it just kind of stays there. So it feels like a limitation of entrepreneurship. So in like communities of color, it's like, okay, well, you're dabbling a little bit in entrepreneurship, we'll kind of leave it here, right? Versus in other locations where you'll find like, okay, what kind of creative idea do you have? What is this solving? What issues is this solving? And not just in a social way, right? But also like practically in just business. What is your idea solving in the needs of the customer that you have? And I think those are options that you don't really see in a lot of communities of color, and particularly in the Bronx. We have we have some resources that help the entrepreneurs map out their business plan for their deli. But what about folks who are creating apps for different restaurants, right? We had someone go through our accelerator pretty recently who's creating a more interactive way to look at menus from a restaurant, and nobody's looking at them, right? But like they've been doing this idea for 2 years, been working with local businesses, because local businesses are being drained by the funding of like Seamless and Grubhub, and they're not able to make the money that they need. So they saw that need, they saw that issue, and they began to do that social impact to be able to uplift the the financial wellness. And so I guess that just kind of answers the question there of like, what type of entrepreneurship is accessible in our communities?
Yeah. I think that's actually a very real and interesting perspective. Like I found that too in minority communities. If you're not just starting some kind of like brick and mortar, or you're selling like, it's only helpful like clothing lines, or like if someone just has this kind of outlandish idea or very creative idea, there isn't much support. And then I think the other challenge too, maybe you could speak to this, is also not really having a business network, so just like a lack of mentorship, and, not having someone you could turn to who's had experience building and growing a business, or building and running a startup. And, even if someone like runs a deli, someone who runs a deli, can't show you how to build a ecosystem, or build a community, or market on social media, so like is that I'm just assuming that's an issue or a challenge, but could you maybe speak to that challenge of like just like a lack of mentorship and lack of access to entrepreneurs with pedigree to help mentor the up and coming entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think at Communitas America, we say this, where like, what, in the Bronx, we may not have a lot of resources, so we have to become the resources. And I think in a lot of different locations, whether, it's predominantly people of color, maybe it's like a location where there's not a lot of entrepreneurship resources, both financially or, mentorship wise. We noticed that that's something we've noticed. And that's a reason why we try to build out our ecosystem even further, because we want folks to be able to relate with someone else, right? So it's like, okay, you know what? Unfortunately, there's not a lot of mentorship. So we have to be the first, right? Like entrepreneurs in our cohorts, they feel like they have to pave the way, but now they're coming back and they're like, okay, look, this is what I found successful. And they're creating collectives with one another so that they can help succeed. And I think that's what I'll talk a little bit about that, because that's a little bit different. So because we've lacked mentorships and maybe people who have kind of like that social capital, something that we've seen stem out of that as a solution is our entrepreneurs kind of create a collective, and they pitch together, right? In different things, be that a grant or be that, in a New York City pitch, right? Like the New York Library pitch, and they'll pitch as a collective. And what that means is that they'll share the money because they know there's not a lot of money, and they want to make sure that everyone is succeeding. And like, that's just an example of what entrepreneurs of color in the Bronx have had to do in order to combat some of the lack of mentorships or even financial accessibility that we don't have.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's amazing, just seeing kind of like maybe how your ecosystem is developing and kind of developing into like this self-fulfilling ecosystem where the people at the top are helping the people at the bottom, and I always tell people, that's why actually Silicon Valley works so well. Like, it's really not rocket science. It's, you know, Reid Hoffman will make himself available to, like, this early stage venture, and give them mentorship, give them advice, and open up his network, to help build and grow that company. And I think that's something we need to start building up in our own community as well. And I mean, that comes with time, but just the people at the top, and people who are successful, like, letting themselves be accessible, and even, with intent, going back and saying, hey, I'm gonna help mentor and advise entrepreneurs. I just think mentorship is like just such a secret sauce to success. It's not money, it's not Google ad credits, but it's knowledge and experience, and that's actually really hard to come by. A conversation with somebody might take you a 10-minute conversation might give you some 10 years of somebody's experience, and help you avoid a bunch of pitfalls. So that's really great that, your ecosystem is kind of evolving into that. And I think, you're going to see a lot of good things come out of that.
Yeah. And I think, we bring in different types of speakers who ultimately do play a bit of a role in that mentorship. But I think that, that example that I gave in terms of the collective, I think mentorship, I think that's why Communitas America, we try to kind of pilot some of these different resources, right? Like, we provide a small grant of $10,000, at the end, because yes, mentorship is, needed. But if we're not going to have any mentorships in the Bronx, right? If not a lot of people are going to be coming in there, plugging in, how do you create mentors? How do you create success stories, right? Well, what is another thing that is a barrier? What is that barrier? That opportunity to iterate. And how do you iterate? Well, it's not just time, it's also money. And how do you put the two and two together to create the type of mentors that will, continue investing in that ecosystem and that local economy?
Yeah. That's amazing, And to segue a little bit, I know we spoke a lot about challenges. Can you talk about maybe how entrepreneurs and minority communities are making the challenges actually work for them?
Yeah. So I think what I'd love to touch on about here is that, like, the topic of entrepreneurs in vulnerable communities, like organizations that serve, be that for profit or nonprofit, that is trying to serve entrepreneurship, serve their community with opportunities for entrepreneurship. They have to think about what does that vulnerability look like, right? And you may think what you want to provide to an entrepreneur, but it goes back to being entrepreneur as well. For us, Communitas America, we've had to ask, we've had to iterate, we've had to say, okay, you know what, we've created this this program for an entrepreneur. Did it work? Well, let's find.
I think Esmeralda froze. Let's give her a second to come back online. Sorry about that, guys.
This isn't serving me.
Can you say that again? I think you froze for a
Yeah,
second.
sorry, it does seem that my internet's a little unstable, but entrepreneurs in these vulnerable communities, they can go to these organizations that are trying to serve them because they're also trying to be entrepreneurial. They don't have it right? So like entrepreneurs go to these organizations, say, this is what I need, this is what I don't have, right? Because then they can bring it to you, right? Like, for example, in Communitas America, we noticed that the large majority of entrepreneurs going through our venture program were women of color. And people, that's when we said, okay, you know what, we're going to do a women's founders cohort because that is the majority of people that are coming out to serve us. And so I think that's one type of vulnerability that entrepreneurs can utilize to benefit for themselves. But I think, there's been a couple of articles that have mentioned this before, but like vulnerability is a strong suit in entrepreneurship. And so, and I think it shouldn't be seen as like something that's bad. And I think we definitely not trying to use that word because I know that word could be kind of tricky, and for different people it might be like, oh, I don't really resonate very much with that word. But it is just meaning like, there are some barriers. That means there's some barriers that you have, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think, but going back to what I'm trying to say is that like vulnerability, it's an important aspect of entrepreneurship. And to be able to identify in vulnerable communities, your strengths are there, right? Okay, what does it mean to educate my community on a product that I know they need, but they don't know they need yet? Like, how do I realize how to bootstrap? How do I know how to create certain kind of partnerships, right? Like those ways that make you vulnerable also make you really strong. At least, right, our women entrepreneurs are able to come together and create coalitions, right? Our entrepreneurs of color, they're able to come to one another and say, you know what do you see? What do you don't see? Because there tends to be less of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's I think that's definitely a really good point that you made about like what it's like to be in vulnerable communities, and actually something that's actually just coming to my mind, because we're talking about just these different social issues that are being tackled, and just bringing in the venture capital piece. I think another challenge, and maybe you could just speak to it, is just the fact that you know, your entrepreneurs or just social entrepreneurs in general are solving huge problems that the VC community necessarily doesn't care about. You know, like I know, for example, food deserts are a really big problem in the Bronx. Like someone who can solve that problem at scale. That's not something that's sexy and attractive to a VC. Like a VC is interested in like drones and AI and all this cutting edge technology where, somebody solving this issue of food deserts could like really impact lives and impact outcomes for like, hundreds of thousands of people just in New York City alone.
Yeah. I will say this, and I'll give one example that I'm so excited about a venture that just graduated from our cohort 4. So we think like it doesn't look sexy, right? We think that venture capital is just wanting to see profit, but and it's true, right? We need to show that profit, and I am arguing that social entrepreneurs and social impact businesses have that profit and maybe even more. We have a venture who came through us called Floor's Flavors, and when she first started, her idea was a bit different, but she ended up talking through about utilizing data. So with your example of food deserts, and I think it's going to take a little bit just for me to paint this picture, right? So like, what is a food desert, right? Well, a redlining, meaning that like, because of redlining history, meaning that organic food, healthy food is inaccessible in a community, and you have to go more than 25 miles to be able to find some kind of actual practical food that isn't going to cause you harm, right? And I don't mean just like a cereal box. I mean like just finding an organic eggplant, right? That's not going bad, the next day because they moved it from Manhattan or something. And so what she realized is that it's not just like, she realized that why is there no inaccessibility there? Well, the supermarkets, they're selling whatever sells, right? And they only know what sells because distributors saying that this is what sells. And so so people have this option, like they're only going to buy based on a hypothetical data of saying this is what's selling. But the fact of the matter is that it's only perpetuating a food desert and creating unhealthier people. And ultimately, like, you know, look at what happened to adobo. People are like, you know what, this, like, I don't stand up for this anymore. And so her venture capital is looking at data and how do people purchase what they purchase, so that the distributor can actually put the right types of food, not based on what is good or based on like what people think is supposed to be good, but based on actual data through smaller initiatives that she has throughout the Bronx. So she's able to get the right type of material in the supermarkets and then sold. And so for me, I think, like, yes, venture capital is looking at like what is more tech-based, what is best, what is more sellable, but there's just like our current systems are not gonna keep functioning well. And so how can we use, she's saying, look, I have this data and I can, you know, figure out how I can sell you this way of analyzing this data that not only provides a more diversified set of items in a supermarket, but then creates more healthy people in the process. And I don't see why venture capital wouldn't be curious about that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, logically, it makes sense that someone would be interested in that. I just think that, you know, like Silicon Valley, or in our case, Silicon Alley, is, you know, once again, like interested in frontier tech. They're interested in 5G. They're interested in, you know, like they're not interested in changing outcomes for minority, you know, because they don't come from that. And I also think, just thinking a little progressively too, is, you know, how do institutions like yours and institutions like ours, like how do we start to build an investment community from the ground up? You know, how do we teach local successful business people how to be angel investors, you know? Because I think sometimes we also just got to stop looking for capital in those places, and how do we get the capital from our own community where we have investors who understand our challenges and understands, you know, like just the social good and the profit that could come out of, you know, investing in these kind of things, you know? And I say that to say, like, you know, I also come from the finance, you know, I worked in a hedge fund, I worked in wealth management. So, and I work with a lot of VCs. I just have a good network, you know, so I kind of know the mindset, like, you know, and it's not necessarily that, you know, people are like, you know, racist with intent or anything. It's just issues in the Bronx is not something that this white guy from Idaho identifies with, you know? And like, how do we get to that place where we're actually just starting to cultivate our own investors? And, you know, there's a lot of there are a lot of people who are financially successful in our community. I think it's a matter of just like teaching them. Like, I had lunch with a friend the other day. I mean, not that this guy is crazy rich, but like, you know, this guy is wearing like a $50,000 watch. Like, yo, you could invest in like 3 different companies in the neighborhood and help, you know, these guys get to the next level and make money back on that. And, you know, but he's just like, he makes all this money. He doesn't know nothing, what to do with it outside of just buying cars and jewelry, you know? So, you know, I think that's another thing too. And I'm wondering, like, you know, are you guys maybe even working on that, or even giving that any thought into like kind of like building up and cultivating your own investment community, taking people who are financially successful and educating them, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, for us as a nonprofit that's working towards social impact, we have a lot of ideas and a lot of things on the table that we are, you know, trying to flesh out and see which direction we go. And I think something like that has definitely been, you know, on our blackboard, right? But I also know that there are other organizations in the Bronx trying to do exactly that, you know, and they are coming to us to figure out like how to do that, because they see that we're creating, you know, a lot of these ventures are coming, these social entrepreneurs are coming into our accelerator program and producing good outcomes. And so they want to be able to tap into that. I think just a couple of days ago, I was contacted with somebody from the SBS who's trying to create kind of like a community hedge fund, and are looking to us to try to really support that. I think that is definitely an important route to go. You know, one of our partner organization called BCDI tackles this, right? Like, what is economic democracy, and
I like
why,
that term.
right? And the thing is like, we're a nonprofit, but we are advocating for entrepreneurship, right? We believe that that is a way to revitalize local economy, but it also is a way to empower our women entrepreneurs and our entrepreneurs of color. And so this organization, the partner of ours, they're working on providing more research and creating B Corps, right? And so that's even something that we talk about. There is an organization in the Bronx called Green Workers Cooperative that produces B Corp organizations in the Bronx. And so there is, just like you said, there's plenty of these resources. And so now how do we come together as an ecosystem to contribute to one another? And I think that is exactly what Communitas America hopes to do, building out these entrepreneurs, having a space for these entrepreneurs and these change makers to come together and figure out, like, what are we going to do, right? And even and we're starting to see the product of that. Like, even our entrepreneurs across cohorts that did not meet unless they had gone through, they didn't meet, they met because of us, and they've been able to create collectives on producing money together, producing change together. And I think we are just so passionate, and we feel so we know that those are two intricately linked, right? Social impact and business. And we seen some good products of ventures have gone through us who can prove that.
Yeah. That's amazing. It sounds like you guys are doing really great work. And you mentioning B Corps a lot. Can you actually, just for the group, just define what a B Corp is and how does someone achieve B Corp status?
Yeah, I'm not an expert. There's definitely loads of folks who are experts. We had one Cornell professor who has just recently written a book on B Corps who came, I think his name is Chris Marquise, Professor Chris Marquise. He came and talked to us about it. And I would just do a quick definition. A B Corps is an organization that allows the people who work to hold part of the stake of that organization, to be able to co-own it together. And there's other aspects to it, etc. But what ends up happening is that economic democracy. So the one person on top, who maybe is a founder, CEO, they're not just like drastically making so much money in comparison to those who are actually building out and putting that sweat equity into that business. There's kind of a little bit more of a equal playing field, and the business is able to rise more because everybody has a stake in it.
Yeah. So that's good. And I thought too that B Corps also about being a social enterprise. Is that true? Like, you have to be a social enterprise in some sort, right?
I believe so. I believe so. But I'm not an expert. I think that this is we bring in the experts for those kinds of topics.
I got you. So I think we had a phenomenal discussion tonight about entrepreneurship in vulnerable communities, the challenges entrepreneurs are facing, and then different things that you guys are doing and that you guys are looking to do to overcome those hurdles. And I kind of just wanted to open up the floor to questions from the crowd. If you guys had any questions or any feedback on the talk tonight, you could feel free to write a question in the chat, or you could feel free to even just, unmute yourself and ask your question out loud.
Yeah, well, I don't have a question, but I would offer a suggestion. You talked about getting, first of all, can you hear me well?
Yep.
Yeah. You talked about getting successful people in the community to become investors and so on. While that is great, I would ask you to consider expanding your definition of investor and venture capital.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my opinion, it doesn't need to be just money. Okay. As a social entrepreneur, I like to help out where I can. So even though my background is in web development and publishing and these kind of things, that's not my core focus today. But that doesn't mean that on a weekend I can't, knock out 4 or 5 websites for a small business in the community and take a 1% stake in that business or a revenue share in that business and so on. So don't just focus on money, because there's a lot of value out there beyond money that that can be provided. A lot of startups, for example, will look to get venture capital and spend a big chunk of that on, you know, building out a sales team and in-house sales team and so on, paying $50,000, $60,000 a salary per year and so on. Because of what I know, I can stop entrepreneurs from doing that because I have access to 3,000 sales reps with C-level contacts that operate on a commission-only basis, right? And therefore you can deploy in 2 weeks, 10, 15, 20 reps without having to take on that, you know, that overhead of salaries and so on. So it's about getting people in the community who really want to contribute to take an inventory of what value they can bring to the table above and beyond money. Obviously money is good, but you know, there's a lot out there beyond money that can be contributed. And you can, you know, work out some equity or revenue share and so on for those contributors as well.
Yeah. That's excellent feedback, and I agree with you 1,000% on that. You know, that it's not just about money, but you know, sharing knowledge, providing mentorship, sharing resources is also an investment in the community and an investment in the businesses themselves. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Yeah. Anybody else with a question?
Hey, Esmeralda, this is Lawrence. How you doing? Good to see you as always.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about the funding or lack of funding, this whole COVID funding and lack of funding in our community? That's one question, and then I'll give you my second question.
Yeah, you know, and I guess I'll put your question with, you know, the last gentleman who spoke. It's true, right? Like we don't have, there's not a lot of funding or money, monetary money. So how do we create resources? You know, like if we're not going to have resources, how do we become the resource? And I think, you know, the example that I kind of kept giving, because I think it's so valuable to see coalition building happening in our entrepreneurs, to be able to access more of the grants. And that's the same one that I will give it as example for you, Lawrence, that we've seen, right? That we've just experienced, our, you know, short 2 years of being active, is that due to COVID-19, there's even less funding, right? And, you know, nonprofits have to work with less money, right? Because of, you know, I'm not a stock expert or whatever based, you know, Jeff could probably speak more of that, but like there's just less funding and people might be less inclined to take those risks, at least in the entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs. And so for us, what we've seen is how do you, like the collective building, the coalition building, and I think it's something that we want to kind of actually even promote, because if we, you know, can't get something as an individual, right? And we don't want to jeopardize our business, right? Giving away huge chunks of our business in order to get money. So then how do we become a unit to be able to get the money that we need? And so the 5 women that created a collective across our cohorts are all women, and they come from different industries. There's education, there's health, mainly those 2, and they've been able to apply to things together. And so when those places are like, well, you don't fit what we need, it's like, well, how can they not? You know, you have all these 5 different businesses that are going to tackle each of those aspects that maybe those grants are looking for. I'm not saying that this is the best way, I'm just giving an example of how we've been able to overcome that.
So it's safe to say, Esmeralda, that the COVID funding has not really helped. It hasn't had a huge impact in helping the Bronx.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that funding was also plagued in loans, right? They're like, here, take out this loan, and that's only like what is that going to do for these small businesses? But there's definitely not enough.
Right, yeah, consider deficit. So my last question is: so what methods have you guys used in this digital space? Like, how do you pivot now in this digital space? What are you guys doing now?
Yeah, you know, I think for us, one of the feedback that our entrepreneur said is like, we know that all the work that we put in social media, how are we going to actually how are we going to take that work and make it, you know, springboard us after COVID-19, right? Or at least when the city is opening up. So how are we going to make the work that we put in actually be fruitful. And so we're doing a pilot program for our alumni where we partnered with a marketing agency to provide consultation hours for our entrepreneurs so that they're able to look at like what was the marketing that they did, but how beneficial was it, and how do they like move beyond that. And so that goes even into the last speaker of like, okay, we cannot provide funding at this point right now. We have a partnership, and that partnership is able to bring that marketing in the space and the realm that the entrepreneur is heading to, because that, you know, what is marketing going to do? More, at least more exposure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the questions, Lawrence.
Yeah.
Anybody else with a question or feedback?
I have a question about government grants. Is there any program to help with underwriting government grants?
That's a good question. Did you hear him okay? He asked if there's any programs that's available with helping underwriting government grants, for helping getting grants.
Yeah. If the immediate resource that comes to my mind is that the New York Public Library holds a lot of different grant writing seminars, and they might be able to expose some information on like how to write it. The other thing I would say is, you know, we were made aware that the Schomburg library in Harlem has a database of all the grants that you're able to apply to, which I think when the libraries were open is something you can access there. But that's something to think about as well, because sometimes to even find out where these grants are and put them all in one location, it's going to be so difficult. And so those are the two resources that I can offer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, Matthew. Anybody else?
I have a question, Jeff. So, you know, in our communities, more so than others, you know, those physical spaces and the resources that programs like yours can provide, you know, something as simple, you know, that we all take for granted is just the Wi-Fi, the broadband access, right? You know, even yourself, right? You're glitching because we're all on, right, in New York City, but you know, we take for granted in terms of what that access looks like in our communities. And so our physical spaces that we provide in our programs, those resources, the personnel, are so critical to our communities. Were there challenges when you had to pivot your cohort and your entrepreneur community to a digital space? What challenges did you have to face in sort of being able to bridge that divide where you couldn't have a physical space where you could provide these resources? What are the things that became necessary to support them in their success?
Yeah, so, you know, for us, because we had to kind of go virtual, that meant, you know, it felt like maybe we were giving a little bit less to the entrepreneurs. And so what we did to pivot is create office hours, not just like with one person like myself, but with every single person behind the Communitas America team. And we have quite a few people with, you know, they're just seasoned professionals. You know, we have someone who worked 20 years in finance in Africa and different organizations across. And so he was able to provide, you know, like one-on-one mentoring. We have someone with, you know, who worked in marketing. And so she was able to provide kind of like looking at like, okay, well, what are some questions you're missing, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, these are some of the questions that you're asking are just, things that we're thinking about. You know, we have our Bronx Innovation Hub, which is a center for our change makers, being, you know, kind of built together. And so we're thinking like, what do people need? What does our vulnerable community need? And so we know we have a lot of entrepreneurs, single mom entrepreneurs, you know, go through our program. And so what do we need? A daycare center, right? And that's in our center. And what would that do? That's only going to provide more business opportunity for someone else who already holds a business in that way and a location to put it. But in terms of virtually, I mean, it's still something that we're kind of figuring out. And some of the biggest pivots have been like, working with marketing partnerships to create consultation for the entrepreneurs, right? The office hours. We are working in every digital space that you can think of, right? If that's WhatsApp, if that's Slack, through email, for the entrepreneurs to be able to gather together, right? Creating that extra space. So if they can't gather to create that community in order to give each other feedback, so how are you creating that feedback? How are you utilizing breakout sessions? How are you utilizing your Slack channel? What information are you giving out every single week for that Slack channel based on the current events? So I think these are some of the things that we've been trying to think through.
Thank you for the question, Jasmine. If anyone else have any more questions or?
Hi, I just have a quick question as well. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Okay, great. It's really inspiring to see the work that you're doing within the community. So, definitely kudos to you. I think one of the questions that I had was, and forgive me if this was answered already, you spoke about sort of getting investment, sort of local community buy-in through investing into these different businesses. And so I was wondering, have you looked into using any sort of maybe crowdsourcing platforms, or maybe even putting something together yourself within the nonprofit? Now granted, this is a post-COVID world now, so I'm sure budgets are stretched extremely thin, but even before COVID, did you have any success with that?
Yeah, so just to give a little bit more context, thank you so much, George, for the question. To give a little bit more context, I think we've had the great opportunity to provide a $10,000 grant to one winner of every cohort. And though that may seem small, it's quite significant for some of the entrepreneurs, and it's something that I think in the foreseeable future we'll be able to continue doing. But to give a context, somebody in our first and second cohort, because they were able to go through our accelerator program, their business plan just became more tight, and they did a crowdsourcing, and they were able to pull in 15 grand in a matter of just like, I don't know, a week or less than a week. And so that only helped us know that, the business ideas that we're teaching, the things that we're iterating was really helpful. But those are really great ideas and things that we definitely steer our entrepreneurs towards who've had great success, or at least a couple who have had great success in terms of 15,000, 5,000 to go toward their business.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, George, for the question. And actually, just maybe think we, don't think there's really any more questions. Maybe we could just go ahead and wrap it up. Just want to tell you all, thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you, Esmeralda, once again for, just making yourself available and coming and speaking about this topic. We're all very passionate about entrepreneurship in minority communities. And maybe just before we log off, I think you wanted to make like an announcement, Esmeralda, about your upcoming cohort.
Yeah, so we have an upcoming cohort. It's just a month long. It's our Women's Founders cohort, and that's available to anyone all over New York City. And we welcome you to apply. For more information, you can find us at www.communitasamerica.org. And there will be there's just a chance to meet with other women founders, build an ecosystem and a community there, as well as an opportunity for a $10,000 grant at the end. And I say join us, because there's a lot of great stuff happening in the Bronx, and I want you to be a part of it.
Thank you, Esmeralda. And thank you all once again, just for being supportive of our Tech Talk series. This is actually going to be the last talk we're going to do for a while before we reboot again in the fall. So just want to tell you guys, thank you for the support. Some of you guys are actually regulars and always getting involved. So just thank you for the support. And just have a good night. And we will follow up with you when we are ready for the next episode.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff, for having me. And I'm just going to write my email here in the chat box. I'd love for anyone who has any questions about, wanting to support the entrepreneurs that we have in our ecosystem. You can feel free to send me an email there.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought that up. Normally what we do after every episode, we send out a recap video of the talk, and we also usually include, like, in your case, your LinkedIn, your email, people to contact you. Is that okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So she dropped in her email in the chat if you guys want to check it out. But within the next day or two, or actually maybe Monday, because the day or two is actually Saturday, we'll be following up with her details and then the recording of the event. So thank you all, and everybody have a good night.
Thank you.